All right, our next speaker is Mr. Bruce Potter. Mr. Potter is co-founder and chief technologist at Pont Technologies, which is a cybersecurity research and engineering company based in Ellicott City, Maryland. Prior to his current position, Mr. Potter was a senior associate at Booz Allen Hamilton, and he managed network and security operations for Network Solutions. Mr. Potter co-authored several books on computer network security. He regularly writes for and speaks at a variety of security conferences, and he runs and hosts probably one of the best security conferences out there, the annual ShmooCon conference in Washington, D.C. So with that, Mr. Potter.
All right. So I always start my talks with the same, assuming I can advance it. Let's try that. Don't believe anything I'm about to tell you. I am a college dropout. Not only did I drop out of college, I dropped out of a state school in Alaska, which is a special breed of college dropout. It's a very fine institution. I never even declared a major. I just went to school for 4 years and eventually got done with it. I have no certs. I'm not a CISP. I've never held a certification for any kind of computer-related anything. I am an author. I will tell you that writing a book, a technical book, is like any other book. It's a marketing activity more than it is a professional exercise. When you submit the proposal to the publishing company to say, I would like to write a book, 80% of the meat of the thing that you turn in is marketing material. Who are competing books, who's going to buy it, who's not going to buy it, how can we broaden the audience. Oh, by the way, give me an outline. The first book that I wrote was 802.11 Security for O'Reilly. I literally got the contract in hand from FedEx and thought, well, I should go learn something about 802.11 security because I didn't know anything, but I had managed to convince somebody that I did, so I had a contract. I say this in this term in kind of a snarky way, but I do really mean it. A lot of times I'll go to events, not necessarily events like this in the Army, but other events out there in our industry, and the people on stage have sketchy credentials at best. And sometimes sketchy credentials are A-OK, and sometimes sketchy credentials are mean that they're sketchy people. And one of the reasons we founded ShmooCon was actually because we were at Black Hat in Vegas, arguably one of the premier technical security conferences in the world, and there's a guy on stage effectively saying 2 and 2 is 6. The press is reporting it. Everyone's lauding him for his research, and we're all like, that's BS. Nobody's calling him on it. And so one of the things that we do at the conference is actually encourage people to interact with the speakers and try to do so in a slightly irreverent way. It's difficult to stand up in a room, even if people you know, and raise your hand and say, I disagree. But that discourse and dialogue is very important. So what we decided to do instead was arm people with squishy foam rubber stress balls and encourage them to throw them at the speaker. I won't bore you with some of the more exotic problems we had over the years when we went to go to things like ping pong balls. We discovered there's an ISO spec for ping pong balls, and our ping pong ball shooter, while was to spec, the balls were not. They were too small. So for those of you that are familiar with physics at all, there's a little diaphragm that the ball has to press up against, and eventually it pops out. When it can't form that seal, it just rolls out, and then frustrated audience members start to heave the gun at the speaker, which is not a desired characteristic. So I've been doing computer security for a terrifyingly long time, given my age. I'm about 20 years now doing this line of work. I had not touched a computer until I went to college. And my first laptop was a Winbook 486 something or other, and this guy down the hall from me says, hey, is it running Windows? And I said, I don't know, I've never used a computer. And he says, oh, here, try this instead. And he hands me some Linux installation floppies. This is in 1993. I managed to bludgeon Linux to run on this laptop in 1993, which I didn't realize was kind of a big deal. And it was downhill ever from that point on because I didn't use Windows. I was a Linux person. I went to the bookstore and bought a Unix Sys5 Release 4 book, and that's how I learned how to use a computer, which is about the most painful thing that you can do as a civilian, as far as I'm convinced. But one thing I've seen over the last number of years is our industry has become much more professionalized, and there's good aspects to that, but there are some really bad aspects to that as well. It tends to hamper innovation. As we professionalize people, it means that we provide, course material and curriculum and test, and it becomes standardized. and we tend to make a bunch of people that all look the same. They all look like the tests. They all look like the course material. And unfortunately, in this industry, we are battling an adversary who really doesn't care about the course material, doesn't care about our professionalism, and this lack of innovation, this lack of understanding of what the battlefield actually looks like, ultimately causes problems. One, the innovation means we're not developing new technology, we're not developing new techniques, we're not developing new methods to attack and defend networks. Secondarily, we create this huge bureaucracy around it that gets in the way of just day-to-day life. So my company does, we're dirty consultants, right? I mean, we do research and engineering for a number of Intel elements, for INSCOM, other services, people in the services. We do commercial work, a lot of commercial work around. People have had really bad days at the hands of targeted adversarial activity, I guess would be the most polite way to put it. People that got hacked, and they bring us in to kind of, help reform, help do, help to make their IT systems better. And I can't help but marvel at times at what it takes to run systems and run computer systems in the federal government and DOD and the IC. We have a collateral secret network that it took us months to get certified for use by DSS. It's 4 computers in an air-gapped network, right? Literally doesn't touch anything, and it took months for us. I mean, where's the risk equation there? Where's the common sense? We can't do our research, very operational research, because, wow, there's a checklist, and we have to check all these boxes. This is what professionalization looks like in the military. This is what form and function look like. And I'm not saying that to whine. I mean, we got paid for it regardless. But, I mean, this is what I do professionally, but this is what I do in my spare time. Like, I founded this thing called the Shmoo Group years ago when I was up in Alaska with a whole bunch of guys and gals who just wanted to go out and do the right thing, write good software, educate people, give talks, have some fun, be a little frivolous, whatever. And I get really frustrated when I see kind of pomp and circumstance get in the way of doing the right thing. And so, it's great to hear Colonel Conti, bringing new ideas to the table with respect to, how to train people. I recognize that, the lack of professionalization can sometimes get in the way, and providing structure is very important. I also believe that just believing that a bunch of hackers, should just be able to get up and do whatever they want to do and not do PT or whatever, like, that doesn't make any sense to me either. There's got to be a happy middle ground. What I want to talk about today is not necessarily this, what is a hacker, because we can debate these conversations have been had in the press and whatever for years. They're not that interesting. For the purposes of today's conversation, I'm not going to talk about criminal activity per se. There are people who are just dyed-in-the-wool criminals. Criminals are going to crime, period. That's just the way it's going to go. They're going to steal where their money is. They're going to do whatever bad thing they want to do. Sometimes they lose computers, sometimes they won't. For the purposes of today, I think of a hacker as someone who is, pushing and probing on technology in new and interesting ways in order to demonstrate weakness, in order to demonstrate innovation, things that people hadn't think about. So I want to explore, what can we learn from the hacker community? What contributions has the hacker community made? I think you may be surprised at some of the things that have come out of the hacker community and maybe who has done them. And how can we work with the hacker community to secure our systems? Now, when I say hacker community, it's not like we all get together and have a meeting. We don't sit around. There are large conferences that occur every year. I should preface, I'm not up here to push my company. I'm not up here to push ShmooCon. Dear God, I'm not up here to push ShmooCon. ShmooCon, about 2,000 people. My wife and I run it out of our house. We sell out in about 20 seconds each year. So having people that want to attend ShmooCon is not a challenge. It's been fantastic. We've had a busload of cadets come down to ShmooCon for 8-9 years now, which has been great. And I think the cadets, once I actually got up, I had an invitation to speak up to West Point periodically, and you get up there and you realize that the life of a cadet who is stranded in Highland Falls is challenging. So you say, do you want to go to DC for, and you don't even have to finish the question, right? Like, yes, I absolutely would like to go to Washington, D.C. That sounds fantastic. Do I need to sweep the streets? I don't really care. So one thing that hackers do, and this is maybe self-evident, is they break things. Why is this important? Hackers breaking things point out weaknesses to us, both in technology and process. And I think there's been some interesting examples of that over the last several months. First, we had Heartbleed. So it's a super interesting vulnerability, right? For years, You know, how do you protect unclassified but sensitive data flowing across the internet? Use SSL. Cool. Well, what do you have for SSL? Oh, we use OpenSSL. Awesome. Everybody uses it. It's everywhere. And then we had a vulnerability in that thing that we used to protect all our sensitive traffic that allowed us to read all the memory out of the hosts that we're speaking. That's bad, right? But no one really predicted that. Nobody really thought, you know, I bet you there'll be a remote memory read error in OpenSSL that allows people to compromise web servers en masse. You know, that's not something that in your threat model and your risk picture people really thought of. And suddenly, like, we had to step into like overdrive to start patching things. And then we had the same thing just this week with shell shock, with this bash vulnerability. Again, it's a shell. For those of you that do Unix work, like shell's whole purposes in life is to execute commands. So the fact that bash execute commands should not be surprising to anyone. However, the way that people chose to use bash in one particular way that normally it couldn't execute commands, oops, wasn't as secure as we thought, and now people can execute these commands, caused the same reaction. And I heard repeatedly from organizations that responded to shell shock, well, we did a lot better than Heartbleed. Like, we were marshaled, we were ready, we knew how to patch, we knew what systems we had, right? That's a critical problem. You wouldn't believe the number of enterprises, commercial, government, that just have no idea what systems they have, right? So I worked for Network Solutions for a while. Here's some dirty and exciting laundry. We migrated data centers. We had 5 data centers in Herndon. We went into one out in Ashburn. We paid IBM Global to come out and inventory all our systems because we didn't know what we had. And IBM came up, you know, they had this list, and they found all these systems, and they had 90% of them, they knew what they did, and this 10% hit list, my team had to go find them and figure out what they were. And find them usually meant break into them, because the people who had login credentials to them were long since gone. And so they got to this one, and it was a Sun Spark server under the floorboards of the data center. Like, well, that doesn't sound sketchy. So we hook up a monitor to it. We don't want to disturb it. Like, you don't even want to move this box. You have no idea, like, what's going to happen to it if it's disturbed. And so we break into the box, and we look, and it was a name server. Unsurprisingly, Network Solutions was a name server company for a long time. And they, you know, it's serving up all these domains. Well, if it's not really correctly serving them up, it doesn't matter if people aren't asking that box the right question, if it's authoritative for those domains. And so we're going one by one through the configuration file. Nope, 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 nope. Not authoritative for any of these domains, no big deal. Got to .ca, Canada. Checked the record, said, oh dear God, this box under the floorboards that nobody had access to is authoritative for Canada. It's one of the 4 authoritative name servers at the time for Canada, and it was serving up domain records correctly. I mean, it was fine. But we didn't know we even had it. We're like, whoa, like, step away from the keyboard. Let's call somebody who gets paid more to make a decision about this. It was really interesting to witness, like, firsthand how bad asset and inventory control is in most organizations. That was 10 years ago. Picture hasn't improved that much as a general course of IT operations, but incidences like shell shock and Heartbleed help drive progress in that space. So when hackers break things, we have to fix them. That's, I think, critically an important point to keep in mind. That's one of the reasons that they release this information. It's not just to fix the core vulnerability itself, the bug in bash, the bug in OpenSSL, but also to keep enterprises and developers honest about, hey, this is how you write good software. This is how you maintain secure systems. Another thing hackers do is point out the obvious. The emperor wears no clothes. Okay, cool. One of the more obvious things on the internet is that you can discover things. You can discover hosts. So there have been tools for a long time that allow us to discover what hosts are on a network. One of the earliest ones was a program called Strobe, and it shipped with FreeBSD, and you could install it on Linux and that kind of thing. This is in the mid-90s. The author of Strobe, his handle was Prof. You may know him by his normal name, which is Julian Assange. He wrote one of the original large-scale port scanners that's out there. Strobe then was kind of superseded by Nmap, which has been one of the granddaddy scanner out there for a long time. Nmap even received funding through DARPA's CFT program a couple years ago, and is used throughout the federal government today to discover systems. Nmap's a great tool, but it has a particular purpose. It's to do pretty detailed scanning and tell you what's really going on. What if you only care about, I don't know, open remote desktop sessions on the internet? How fast could you scan the internet to find them? as a mortal. Not saying you have super secret ninja NSA capability or whatever, but it was like a normal mortal who can go to Amazon and buy instances of, on EC2. How fast can you scan it? Well, last year at ShmooCon, our closing panel was on mass scanning, and we scanned the internet, I think, 4 times during the talk. Found all manner of open, exciting things. The guys who did the scanning have crafted a very particular way of doing the scanning to try to not violate Title 18. So they, look at the system without really getting access to it. It's kind of a gray area, but it's neat. Wasn't me, so that was my primary concern. And what was interesting is when Shell Shock came out, one of the guys who was on stage with us, Robert Graham, went out and wrote a little script for mass scan, this large-scale scanning thing, and he scanned the internet before the advisory, the ink on the advisory was even dry, and said, I found 3,000 hosts that could be compromised right now just from the root file system. Just by going to the host / and putting in this stuff for bash, I could take over the host. It took him about 10 minutes. And then he's like, there's a bug in my script. If I ran it again, I could probably find thousands more, right? That's how long it took. So when something like Shell Shock comes out, which is systemic and affects millions and millions of hosts, it can be acted on very rapidly. This is where I kind of disagree with what Dimitri said. Things don't travel at light speed. I don't know. We're pretty close right now. Like, you could weaponize Shell Shock and compromise all available hosts on the internet within a matter of minutes. People took Rob's code and actually turned it into they dropped rootkits on boxes. Those 3,000 boxes were compromised within 24 hours. And they even put a little thank you note in the log string that they dropped in the box to Rob. I don't know Rob's going to be on the street much longer. I like Rob as a guy, but, this is the area in which we tread this gray area. Did he violate Title 19 or 18? I don't know. Did he enable other people to? Absolutely. Is that legal? I'm not here to judge. One of the more interesting discovery things that occurred was what I feel was the last great talk at DEF CON. If you've never been to DEF CON, it's not today the conference it was 10 or 15 years ago. This gentleman by the name of Greg Shipley gave a talk on war driving, the idea of driving around and finding 802.11 networks. He had met with a Wall Street Journal reporter several weeks prior to DEF CON. This is, I think, DEF CON 8. So this is 12, 13 years ago. And he had driven around with this reporter in San Francisco with an antenna and said, look at all these open wireless access points. I can connect to them. I can break into people's computers, steal their whatever the hell they have. Terror. And Greg's very good at theatrics, and the Journal reporter wrote this great article on it. So Greg gets up on stage to present his work, which is arguably an important thing to do as a researcher. But it's DEF CON, so it's a little different. Greg's pretty sober. He's got some candy ravers on stage with him who are not really completely dressed, roaming around. He is a polarizing figure in the community. There are people yelling at him. There are fights breaking out in the crowd. This is in a tent on a roof of a hotel in Las Vegas at 9 o'clock at night. This geek is on stage, fights. I was like, this is just amazing. Like, this is the most epic thing that you'll ever see is Shipley's war driving talk. And the thing is, technically it was very sound. And it served as the foundation of a lot of what we see wireless security as today. But it was Greg Shipley up there with a bunch of candy ravers dodging beer bottles like he was reenacting the Blues Brothers, It was pretty amazing, actually. So other things that hackers do is we find novel solutions to things. And one of the problems that we face is education. How do you teach people to do what we do? And this topic has come up a number of times. It's a challenge to engage people and get them to think creatively. And something that's come out of the hacker community and is now even embraced in the government is this idea of hacking contests, capture the flag, and things of that nature, where people have created ways to gamify breaking into a system and defending systems. And not only that, but they've made it exciting and sexy, and there's projectors with scoreboards and all kinds of music and all kinds of, it's really exciting. We do a hacking thing that we call Hack Fortress. It's a combination of Team Fortress 2, it's a first-person shooter, I don't know if there's any TF2 players in the room, but and a hacking contest where the 2 game environments affect each other in real time. So if the hackers reach an objective, the other TF2 team might be set on fire or something like that. Not really, the virtual world, but... and you'd be amazed. I mean, we'll have 2 teams of 10 people playing against each other, and we'll get like 500 people watching the game. And people are like, can you live stream this on the internet so we can watch it too? Like, people want to watch hacking. And part of it, then they learn hacking, they learn defense by witnessing, what other people are doing. Hackers are paranoid. Man, are we paranoid. Especially hackers who then come and do government service and work with the services in the IC. We get super scared. I don't know if you know Dan Gear, used to work at Microsoft, then he was at InQtel. Dan basically lives out in the woods doing only like long wavelength RF and living with his horses. He does not like computers anymore at all, having learned what he learned. What's interesting is the hacker community tends to push the bounds of what's kind of commercially and publicly available with respect to security and privacy. It's a really interesting challenge. How secure can I make myself without having to use anything over exotic or bind my way into it? And what we found in the last 2 or 3 years is with all the breaches and all of the credit card data being stolen and public disclosure of large-scale compromise in these systems, the public at large is suddenly interested in privacy-protecting technologies. You couldn't sell privacy. You couldn't give privacy away 10 years ago. And now people are knocking on the door saying, how do I protect my personal information? Where do I get one of them black phones that will protect all my voice calls and things like that? People don't want to be tracked. On the flip side, people don't understand the adversary. While the American public may be pretty good at being scared, they don't know what they're scared from. I had a client or a potential client that wanted us to do work for them. They ran an industrial control system company in Michigan, building little ICS widgets, and they called us up and said, we need your help. We don't really have security. We want to protect ourselves. After some conversation, I said, what are you trying to protect yourself from? This is a company in Michigan. Just want to preface that before I say the next thing. They say, well, we're really worried about the NSA breaking in and stealing our stuff. What? Okay, hold on. You're making ICS. They're like, yeah. I'm like, for the United States. They're like, yeah. I'm like, and you're U.S. citizens. Yeah. What's the NSA going to do with that? Like, start another country selling ICS against you? Like, I really didn't understand. And they would not bend from that view. They had been scared so badly that the NSA was in all their stuff and stealing their things that they were convinced that they needed to hire consultants to come protect them from the NSA. And I'm like, we are out. Like, we are not, no way, shape, or form am I going to be a charlatan and steal your money for that one. Some hackers just want to watch the world burn. There are certainly a subset of hackers who are straight up just bent on causing chaos. And I'll provide a short example here as a segue to get off the stage. But there was this organization called Gobbles. I don't know how many people were in the scene about a 1997 timeframe, but Gobbles was a very odd, and publicly the story is not really well known, collection of people who got together to just cause havoc. And they started releasing vulnerabilities and exploits of various pieces of software. And when they did so, they were really big jerks. I mean, we would conventionally call them trolls today. They weren't called trolls at the time, but man, were they exciting. And they would just be tearing people apart and whatever. And people were like, all the vulnerabilities you disclosed are trivial, they're ridiculous, whatever, shut up. And they say, yeah, you're right. And then they dropped this huge vulnerability in Apache on OpenBSD, which arguably was one of the most secure publicly available operating systems at the time. And it was a very novel vulnerability and exploit. People were like, how did they do that? And they're like, we're not going to tell you. And they continued to troll everyone. And they're like, well, you must have stolen that from someone. You couldn't have done that yourself. They're like, oh, you're right, you're right. 2 days later, they drop a huge vulnerability in OpenSSH, the thing that we use to do remote control all these systems. Remote exploit. They could compromise all these systems running OpenSSH. Again, very novel. And if you read their write-ups, you would think they were 6-year-olds. Right? You couldn't reconcile this view of like, I'm breaking all these things with, man, am I an ass? And so then they came to DEF CON, and they were going to present at DEF CON, and some weird things happened. One, the crew that showed up on stage was different than what everybody expected. Two, they were really whacked out. There was a dude there who goes by the name of the Unix terrorist, who was basically wearing a pair of jorts and nothing else, and had his own version of martial arts, and he was running around stage trying to pick fights with people. They continued to drop vulnerability information during this talk, rambling talk, and then they just disappeared from the scene after that. They're gone. They just kind of did their thing, and they left. As a footnote to that, the Unix terrorist did go on to a fantastic life of crime. I think there was a story in Esquire, something about him. When he got taken down, he had been stealing credit card information, carding it, selling the credit card information, all that kind of stuff, made millions of dollars in cash, and literally got busted in I think it was Miami Beach, somewhere in Florida, in a condo with sports cars, hookers, and blow. Like, he literally had prostitutes, drugs, and sports cars, and wads of cash, still shirtless, but had been doing a lot of roids. The guy was gigantic. And like, his picture, like, from the parties, like, he looked like he did in Vegas, but he was 5 years older and covered in cash. He was a very interesting character. Finally, the thing I want to leave you with is hackers evolve. This industry has changed a lot, and the hacker scene has changed a lot. The one thing that's really changed is the amount of money that has flowed into this industry, right? 20 years ago when I got into this, there was the hacking scene, and there were some folks in NSA and NIST, and a few other odds and ends that cared about security. In the commercial space, almost nobody. Remember when the military was the laughingstock of security, cybersecurity? People breaking into your networks from Germany and all kinds of other places, nobody even knowing? I ran an ISP in Alaska. And we would have the Air Force Base call us there and say, people are pinging our servers. I'm like, yeah, you mean like literally just sending a ping and getting a response? Like, yeah. I'm like, why is that a big deal? It's like, because I have to write an incident report for every ping packet we get. Well, you're going to continue to write incident reports, and I assure you you'll get more of them over time. So, but one thing that's really happened is the information that we have in the hacker scene, the people that are discovering these vulnerabilities, is worth a lot more than it used to be. It's not just used for chaos, and it's not just used for making systems better. It's used for selling to the highest bidder, right? So you have a number of things happen. One, you have vulnerability and exploit information being used by God knows who, for God knows what purpose. You have all kinds of people reading stories in the Post about, we have not enough cybersecurity professionals. Well, what am I going to do when I retrain? I'll be a cybersecurity professional. I'll get my, SISM or CISP or whatever and go sit at some desk and hold down a job. When I was at Booz Allen, so I do not look like the stereotypical Booz Allen consultant. When I was at Booz Allen, I would interview people, that for the computer scientists in the room, you'll get this. I would ask them questions like, what do you want to do with your career? Like, I want to use the internet to catch pedophiles. What? Like, what does that even mean? That's not really an answer to the question. Like, that's great that you want to use the internet to catch pedophiles, but anyway, a series of questions would go, and at the end of it, somebody asked me, how'd the interview go? I said, if it was a Turing test, I would have guessed computer. Like, I couldn't, it was unbelievable. And the thing is, we would not offer these people jobs, and they would send me a thank you letter like a week later saying, oh, I appreciate the interview, just so you know, I got a job with some other defense contractor, or, whatever. I'm like, someone hired you? Like, holy crap. But when there's that much money involved and there's that much at stake, people are going to, oh, yeah, I'll be a security expert. That sounds legit, especially in an industry that's not professionalized, that doesn't have degrees. I go to universities all the time and give talks, and there are all kinds of kids really excited about learning computer security, and the curriculum that they're being taught is really not that good. And the challenge is, a lot of what happens is student-run organizations teaching themselves. It's great because they're motivated, and it's terrifying because they're teaching themselves, right? The professors don't engage. They don't want to. They don't know how to. The students are just doing their own thing. Sometimes they're doing good things, and sometimes they're, at best, they're chasing their tail. At worst, they might be committing crimes and not even realizing it, right? So it's a very challenging time, obviously from cybersecurity in general, but even the hacker community, as I've seen it over the last 20 years, is changing dramatically. I think the one takeaway I want you to have from all of this, these storytelling, that kind of thing, the hacker community still exists, right? And the war that we're fighting is not the French versus the British circa 1700, where we're all politely standing across from each other in the field and waving, right? Like, we have very accurate weapons. They have very accurate weapons. It's an amazingly asymmetric battle. But when we go through and we professionalize this and we don't pay attention to the innovation that's occurring outside of our own walls, we get blinded to the fact that this is a dirty, nasty war, right? We get blinded to the fact that this is a hard problem because, well, I have a checklist and I have a labor category with a set of requirements for people that can assist me. And these are the rules that I play by. And I can appreciate the need, especially in the government, to create those walls and those rules. But at the end of the day, like, you have to continue to be aware of where innovation comes from and find ways to adopt it. So I'm not sure if that means you're kicking me off or I still have time for a couple questions. Couple questions, all right. I certainly don't say computer network operations. I try to avoid the term cyber as much as possible and be more specific with the domain at which I am speaking with. I will use cyber periodically, but it's the same way I feel about cloud. Like if you're talking about cloud, like is it infrastructure as a service? Is it platform as a service? Is it software? I mean, you tell me what it is as a service, and then we'll have a rational discussion. If you say cloud, I throw you out of my office. So, cyber is frustrating because it works very well as a term to encompass, what was information security in these other domains, but there are very few times when it makes sense to use it because oftentimes I need to be more specific than that. Yes. Certainly on the defensive side, we are dinosaurs still. It's amazing how much effort we put into the defensive side, and we still struggle every day with basic things like patching and things of that nature. I think we've made great strides, almost in spite of ourselves in that regard. But I think that the defensive capability, the problem with that risk equation that he had, there's a lot about what Dimitri and I have philosophical disagreements with a lot of things. So that risk equation thing is interesting because when you look at how an enterprise would weight something like Heartbleed or weight something like shell shock with respect to their risk rating, it would be on the floor. It would not be something that was on their radar screen. But they happened, and they were bad, and people are dealing with it. And so I think it requires a more nuanced and sophisticated view of things to understand I need operational capabilities to be able to respond to systemic and catastrophic disclosures like that. That's an important thing to do. So rather than going point by point by point on some risk scale, you need to be able to look at your entire enterprise, look at what capabilities we have, and think, how do we counter the adversary that we're facing now, and how do we counter the adversary that we're likely to face 5 years from now? Because that's really, I have this graph. I draw these two non-intersecting lines of the problems we solved and the problems that adversaries have created for us, and either they're diverging or at best they're parallel, but they're certainly not intersecting. We're solving problems from 5 years ago. We're not solving today's problems, and that's one of the biggest challenges I think we face today. Cool.
Again, Bruce will be around. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's an awesome black badge.